Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I've got a full review to do for you on this tiny little sucker. This is the Civivi Baby Banter. This is a knife designed by somebody I consider a friend at this point, Ben Petersen, and he is the owner of Knafs Co. with his wife Athena, who's also awesome. I've gotten to talk to her a little bit. She's great. Ben, he's been on my podcast at this point. We talk now and then. He's been helpful to me. I like the guy. So keep that in mind. I feel like there's this thing. Let me start by saying this. I've noticed a couple of people across my time since the banter came out and now the baby banter, it's happened a few times again, where I've noticed some people misunderstand Ben, or maybe even deliberately misunderstand Ben, where maybe it's because they are jealous or I don't know what. Not saying people aren't allowed to have critiques of a person. I'm sure plenty of people have plenty for me. But I've noticed several people like, oh, the banter's only successful because Ben used to work for Blade HQ and because he did all his videos and he's like YouTube and Instagram famous because of that, blah, 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 blah. Two things can be true at the same time. Ben can have a somewhat unique level of notoriety and fame in the knife world that helps him sell his knives, and the knives can also be good. And that's where I sit on it. I consider Ben a friend, like I already said. So it doesn't bother me in one bit that he's Instagram famous and all that. In fact, I love seeing it because I like the guy and I think he deserves it. And I think most of that popularity has come from, ironically, kind of how humble he is a lot of the time and how honest he seems to be. And like, consider the fact that Ben was at Blade HQ for a long time doing their videos, and he would be doing videos from a perspective of a marketing guy, and he would be talking about knives that they're trying to push from a marketing perspective. And he would say that he personally wouldn't buy them because he's a cheap sucker. That's something he would say all the time. And yet he doesn't get in trouble for that. He kind of gets applauded for it because it's honest. It's a different way to make content. And having had him on my podcast and talked to him a little bit long form, having talked to him several times since, he is that person. Like, he's just kind of calls it like he sees it. He tries to be nice. I've never seen him be mean to somebody. He's just a nice guy. And so I like that he has some fame behind him in this weird small microcosm of a knife world, right? And yeah, I've just seen several people try to like drag it down of like, oh, people only like the banter because it's him. If somebody else came out with it, blah, blah, blah. Sure. If somebody else who is completely unknown came out with the banter, it might not be a big popular huge seller, right? But that doesn't mean that the design wouldn't still be good. It just means it wouldn't be well known like it is. So I really like the banter. My review of it was positive. The baby banter, newsflash, is going to be positive as well. Not because Ben's a friend. I paid for this knife. In fact, I bought it from his site for more than it costs from a retailer because I wanted to support him. Like, I paid more than full dollar for this knife. They give you extra stuff when you buy it on his site too. I'm not like saying it's a bad deal. I'm glad I did it that way because it comes with cool goodies. But anyway, two things can be true at the same time. I can like Ben Petersen and think he's a cool dude and he's deserving of the success that he has. And his knives can objectively on their own be good knives. So there you go. They're also, neither of them, my favorite knives. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, everyone needs to have a baby banter. It's the greatest thing that has ever happened to knives. I don't think it's that good, but it's quite good. We're going to talk about it. So that was a long intro into this, but it's rubbed me the wrong way. And I feel like I've kind of stuck up for them a couple of times to people individually when they've like, oh, well, it's just blah, blah, blah. It's like, have you handled the knife? Have you tried it? Have you checked it out? Did it feel terrible in your hand for some reason? Because it feels great in mine. The cutting geometry is good. The action is nice. I don't know what else you want. Anyway, let's get there. So, the baby banter. This comes from Civivi. The full-size banter, if you can call it full-size, still a small knife, comes from We. So this is a more budget-friendly offering in the sense that it costs less, and it's made out of different things. So my banter is in, I think it's S35. Is that what they're in? I don't remember. It's been a while since I've held it. I flicked it the other day, actually. I don't know. I didn't look at what steel it was in. I think they're S35. This is in Nitro V. They're both in G10. They both have steel liners internally, although this one, I don't remember actually on the Banter if it has full liners or not. This just basically has the liner on the lock side, and the show side is just G10. So there's that. We've got a couple of barrel spacer standoffs. We've got a great deep carry clip. We're going to talk about that. We've got what I assume is just steel hardware. We've got a typical Civivi pivot. We've got blacked out thumb studs. On the Banter, they're blue, which is kind of fun. I have the same like blacked out version on that. On both of mine, I also, because I got it on his site, had him, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. It's kind of difficult to see, but right up here it should be. I had him sign it. Yeah, it's faint, but he kind of like Dremels in his signature if you ask for it when you buy him on his site. So yeah, Nitro V instead of S35, G10 in both categories, liner lock in both categories, thumb studs in both categories. There's a lot of similarities here. So let's jump into Ergo's carry, cutting, action, all that kind of stuff. My camera's about to overheat, so I'm going to turn it off for a second. We're going to jump back in. All right, let's jump back in. Sorry, my camera got way too hot. So we were talking about Ergo's carry, cutting, action. We're going to jump into all that. Let's do it. Ergos. This knife, as tiny knives go, has fantastic ergos. It's kind of like the category of like a Spyderco Lil Native, where with the forward finger choil, great. You're getting all 4 fingers on it, just barely. Still, it's tiny, right? But you feel like you've got a full purchase on this knife. It's a tiny little blade sticking out at that point, but you've got a full purchase on it. So it's a very usable, tiny little blade. Choked back, not using the forward choil, still comfortable enough knife, honestly. Like I can work with this. My pinky's hanging completely off, but I could cut with this knife and it would be fine. But the forward choil in kind of a saber grip or a hammer grip is just great. You've got a you got a handful of knife is the best way to say it, I think. You can also see when I reach up, I get all the way to the tip with my thumb, which is very uncommon. One of Ben's things about knives, if you're familiar with, with the ways he critiques knives, which is a little bit different from most people, is he really likes to be able to reach out and touch the tip of the knife with his pointer finger, so that when he's doing like crafts and stuff with his kids, dad knife stuff, it works. And this definitely passes that test, because even with my thumb, I'm getting all the way to the end of the blade there. So yeah, in a saber grip or a hammer grip, it's very, very comfortable in that forward choil. Not in the forward choil, still comfortable in a saber grip, still comfortable in a hammer grip. It's comfortable in a draw cut that way. Up in the choil, not as much because it kind of pokes you, but you could do a draw cut like this if you needed to. Reverse grip, without the choil, not so much. With the choil, actually works. Oftentimes reverse grips, I find the choil doesn't work that well because a pinky feels weird in it. In this case, it doesn't. That totally works. Reverse grip draw cut. Again, that choil thing kind of gets in the way. That's a grip that doesn't super work, but regular reverse grip does. So ergos are very good. For a tiny knife, I would say I like this better in hand than the Lil Native. I probably like it better in hand than even the Giant Mouse Ace Riv. It just works great in my hand, honestly. As tiny knives go, it's fantastic. And that's an important qualifier there, as tiny knives go, because tiny knives are a really hard thing to get ergonomically right. I don't have gigantic hands. I wear medium gloves, but I fill them out real well. But tiny knives can often just not feel great in hand. It's a design difficulty. It's easier to make a really big knife feel comfortable in hand because there's just more surface area to work with and mold and make neutral. And this, you gotta have the choil, and the choil's gotta be done right. So I like that. It's done really well. Let's talk action. This knife should not be this fun to play with. It is like drop shutty, basically. With a tiny, light little blade, it's still just dropping really, really well. It flicks well with the thumb. It flicks well with the middle finger. I find myself, when I carry this knife as a secondary, pulling it out to play with it quite a bit. It's just fun to flick, and the fact that it's that smooth on a closure with a blade this light and this small, it like shouldn't be the reality, but it is. It runs on bearings, and it's done great, and it's just, it's too much fun to play with again, for such a tiny little knife, it shouldn't be this good. So action is great, both on opening and on closure, especially being a thumb stud only knife. Like, I don't know, I'm not generally a huge fan of thumb stud only deployment methods. There are cases where I love it because it's done really well, and this is one of them where it's just like these thumb studs are perfectly placed, the detent is done well, everything about it just works way too good for a knife this small and this inexpensive. Cutting. This blade stock is really thin, and it's a very tall flat, and because of that, it's really thin behind the edge. It's incredibly slicey. This thing is a breeze through packaging materials like tape and cardboard and paper. I have cut an apple with it, just because Ben cuts his kids' apples with his knives, and that's a way that he judges knives, is how well they cut apples, and I've kind of adopted that. A lot of the time, that's a task that I like to make sure I do with a knife leading up to a review. And I mean, you're size limited here, right? So you're not cutting through an entire apple at once. You're having to like creatively make slices, but it is very slicey. It slices through something like an apple incredibly well. I've used it on zip ties. I've used it on cardboard. I've used it on some paracord. I've used it on threads on clothing and stuff, and it's just slicey, has a great edge on it from the factory. The Nitro V has done great for me. I really like Nitro V. In fact, honestly, I like Nitro V as much as S35VN. So I'm cool with this being the steel choice and it being cheaper than the Banter was. So yeah, it's a great blade. I really, really like it. The grind is great. The finish on it is really nice too. This kind of stonewash DLC. I've found that it hides wear incredibly well. Not that I've been brutal on this knife, but you can't tell I've used this at all. It looks really, really great. That leaves us with carry. Obviously, this knife is going to be a breeze to carry. It is tiny, and it doesn't weigh much, and they put an awesome deep carry clip on it. I love deep carry clips that come all the way to the butt end of the knife. I also love deep carry clips that are countersunk down into the scale material they're set in. I also love when the hardware is countersunk down into the clip itself. This is one of those cases. It has all three great things about a deep carry clip. It comes all the way to the butt end of the knife, it's countersunk in, screws are countersunk into it. It's just pocket clip perfection, in my opinion. The pocket clip isn't hot spotty for me. It's not a problem in pocket. It's not snagging on stuff. It's not difficult to get in or out, but it has good retention. The knife is light. The knife is thin. This is going to be one of the most comfortable to carry knives possible. Like, regardless of the size of your pockets, it's pretty much going to fit. This will go in a fifth pocket on jeans and stuff like that. Sometimes I like carrying a knife there, so that's great. I've typically been carrying it back left pocket. That's how I carried it today, actually. And it's a very easy knife to forget you have on you because it carries so incredibly tiny and compact and light and smooth, and it's great. So we've talked action, we talked carry, we talked cutting, and we talked ergos. That's it. I mean, honestly, like, it's just, this knife, as tiny knives go, is a home run in my opinion. Price point aside, it is one of my favorite tiny knives. I genuinely, up until recently, my kind of king of the hill, of this hill, of the tiny knife hill, was the Giant Mouse Ace Riv. And I just let that knife go. And I probably wouldn't have sold that if it weren't for having this. This is, in my opinion, carries a little better. Feels just as good, if not better, in hand. It's a slicier profile. Even though that has a hole and this has studs, this thing middle finger flicks probably better than that knife does. The flipper on that knife isn't an incredible action. So this, you've got flicking, that's probably even better. And you've got thumb stud that actually works really well as a thumb stud. This drop shuts better than that did. Like, this is punching at a weight class. And it's kind of typical of Civivi, right? Like, Civivi puts together incredible knives for the money. They're wizards at that. So they've got this segment down. But to have it done, I've never played with a Civivi this small. And to have this design come together and work so well is just impressive to me. It's also not lazy. It's not just the Banter shrunk down to be smaller. Like, the Banter does not have these lines. It doesn't have this forward choil. It's similar. You can tell that this is an iteration of the Banter, but it's not just a shrunk down Banter. I hate when people take a big knife. Sometimes it works. I shouldn't say I hate, because sometimes it's fine, but it bothers me when people will take a design that's relatively large, not like the Banter is large again, but a bigger design, and then they just shrink it down 25% and they call it a mini. And if it's completely neutral, maybe that works, but if it's a knife that has shape to it, like, oftentimes the tiny version of that knife just doesn't work because it doesn't scale properly. And if you've got a choil, that can't just shrink. Like, choils are designed for fingers, and just making a smaller knife, unless it's only for people with smaller hands, like, doesn't always translate. This was designed to be a small version of the knife, and those design considerations were made to make it work in that way. So I respect it. I like it. I think it's done really well. I think it's just like, what more can you ask for? It cuts incredibly well. It carries incredibly well. Feels great, in my hand at least. It's super lightweight. The action is fun. Like, it's a really good knife. And Nitro V is a good steel. The construction is solid. It makes me happy. I like this knife a lot. So I can also say, like, it's impossible to completely remove your biases, right? I can't remove from my brain completely that I like Ben Petersen. I think he's a cool dude. And when I talk to him, I enjoy our conversations. But at the same time, like, I feel like I'm pretty good at looking at knives at this point. And I'm pretty good at knowing what I like and what I don't like. And there are exceptions that happen, right? There are times I find a knife that has a feature that I dislike vehemently that works on that, and I can see it for what it is. But I just feel like I'm pretty good at sorting out my thoughts when it comes to the object of a knife. And this, objectively, in my opinion, is good. Maybe that doesn't make sense to say objectively in my opinion, but maybe it does. I don't know. I'm trying to make sure that I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's here, because I think this is a good knife. Removed from Ben Petersen is what I'm trying to say. If there was no Ben Petersen attached to the Banter or the Baby Banter, and frankly, I like the Baby Banter even more than the Banter at this point, because the Banter I'm going to carry as a secondary anyways. It's a small knife, and this is just so freaking good at being tiny that it just sails. It works. But yeah, if I removed Ben from this knife, if it was possible to imagine some other random designer came out with this, if just Civivi put this knife out, I probably wouldn't try it if just Civivi put it out, because I wouldn't feel the need to support it. But I'm really glad that Ben is the catalyst behind it, because it's a freaking awesome knife. It just works so well. So, I don't know. Maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't. Maybe I seem like I'm a shill for Ben, who doesn't pay me anything or do anything for me at the end of the day other than be a good friend. So, I don't know, take it for whatever it's worth. I like the Baby Banter. I think it's a good knife. I think it's a home run of a tiny knife. It's one of the better, if not one of the best, tiny knives that I've experienced. In fact, it's my current favorite. So, take that for what it's worth. If I'm going to carry a tiny knife, that's going to be the one for the next little while, at least, until something else comes out that I like even more. That is going to be the one that goes in my pocket. I've sold all my little natives that I've ever had. I don't have the Riv anymore. It's kind of the tiny knife in my collection, and I carried it today. I had already carried it plenty to do the review. I just actually wanted to carry it. So, is what it is. I love the Baby Banter, and Ben's a cool dude. There. All right. Thanks, guys, for watching. I will link to Knafs Co. down below, their Instagram and their site, because they're awesome, and I think they're worth supporting. So check it out if you haven't. All right. Thanks. See you on the next one.